I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're about to hear a chapter of the only story that matters. Every week, I write a brand new episode of this ongoing sword and sorcery serial, and then I record it in one single, flawless take. No one else does that. The story is an ongoing one, but you should absolutely feel free to jump in right here. If, however, you feel the need to get caught up first, there are a few ways to go about doing it. First, you can listen to all the previous episodes of the podcast for absolutely free. Or you can pick up the prose ebooks for only $2.99 each on Amazon. Or, my favorite option, you can do both. It's your call, though. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, Part 36. He had made it. He had finally arrived in the home he had never known, the realm of men. He was home, and he was alive, and that was all that mattered. He'd been restrained by that wizard's pet, had been blasted with that cursed white light, had been sent careening across the sundered worlds, but none of that mattered. It didn't matter, because he lived, and he was home. His lungs still drew air. His heart pumped blood. His muscles still had strength with which to fight. Strength he would need to seize what belonged to him, to take back what was his. To march across that rocky tundra, to find the throne, to find his throne, to sit upon it, to take his rightful place and become the leader, the ruler of that world. Because shattered and broken though it might be, the fact remained. It was his. So Maul had set out, marching across the tundra. He set out to do what he had always done, set out to claim what belonged to him, to claim his birthright, and to beat the breath from anyone, man, beast, monster, or even the gods themselves, to batter and leave broken anyone who dared to stand in his way. He set off across the tundra, and he paid no mind to the glowing green eyes that multiplied in the darkness around him. Maul didn't know the realm of men. He knew that it was his origin and his destiny, but that was all. He didn't know where his throne was or how it might be found, but in the distance, barely visible in the darkness, he saw something. A dim, shimmering outline seated upon the horizon. But unlike the jagged outcroppings that dotted the tundra, this shape was different. It was smooth, unnatural, made by the hands of man, or perhaps something else. But whatever it was massive. It reached up from that rocky landscape like a humongous arm, stretching up to reach the full moon that hung heavy in the night sky above it. It was impressive. It was imposing. A tower worthy of a king, worthy of the one true king of men. So Maul figured it was just the place to start his search. But as Maul trudged, steadily, doggedly across that rocky landscape, those glowing eyes, the ones that grew more numerous and more luminescent by the second, They began to move. That curiously dim sun had finished its retreat beyond the horizon. It had abandoned the sky to that heavy full moon, and in its absence, the glowing eyes and the creatures that bore them had been emboldened. Maul kept his eyes forward, as he always had, and as he always must. But the glowing eyes did not go unnoticed by his eyes, angry, narrowed, and with flecks of fire growing within. He didn't know what the eyes belonged to. He didn't care, because whatever they were, they drew breath in the realm of men, in his realm, and whether they knew it or not, they were his subjects, and they would either greet him on their knees or they would die on their feet. Maul still believed this to be true, still knew it to be true, when the first troll attacked. It came from behind, but the next 5 came from all directions, as did the 5 after that and the 5 after that. They poured from their caves, from the dark, shadowy holes where they had cowered, hidden from the scattered last rays of the sun. They struck with a quickness belied by their bulky, lumpen forms, with a ferocity that seemed incongruous with the ignorant looks plastered on their slack-jawed faces, and with the unerring certainty of an army whose numbers had no end. Whether because of the excitement of his homecoming, exhaustion from his trip across the sundered worlds, the forgetfulness that grew daily as a result of his shattered mind, or because of simple, base arrogance. Maul had traveled across that broken world, empty-handed. When the trolls attacked, when they swarmed, when they fell upon him in the darkness, he had time to unhook his cudgel from his belt, had time to remove it and take it in his fist, but no time to raise it, no time to swing it, no time to send it crashing into the skull of whatever insolent fool would dare attack his king. He was surrounded by trolls, hedged in on all sides by those nescient monsters. They knocked his legs out from under him, but when he fell backward, he barely fell at all, instead landing on more of what surrounded him, more of what piled on top of him, blocking out the sky itself. He fell upon bloated, green flesh. There was no room to mount a proper attack, so Maul used what weapons he had at his disposal. Fists and elbows, feet and knees, head and teeth. He gave in to his instincts, the savage drive to kill, the primal urge to survive. He let it take over as he lashed out at everything around him in every way he could. He allowed his body to be controlled by instinct and muscle memory, genetic muscle memory, passed down by untold generations of conquerors, of rulers, of killers, of great men and women, of men and women who didn't just achieve greatness, but took it. But as his instincts, as his memory took over, as his broken mind limped along, he realized something strange. His assailants did not speak. The battle was a heated one. Though he was outnumbered, Maul had already spilt a considerable amount of blood. Enough of those trolls' thick life had flowed out of them that Maul, his attackers, and likely even the ground below, had become coated in that gruesome mixture that accompanies the fiercest, most brutal struggles. In a fight this intense, a struggle this violent, Maul didn't expect conversation. But aside from a grunt, a cry, a roar, and a sigh, Maul heard nothing from his assailants. No barked orders, no words of encouragement, no curses to the gods above or below. He heard nothing. The trolls were strong as they were dumb. But they were also dumb as they were strong. Maul could have fought off 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 of the fat, ignorant beasts if he had been fully healthy, 30 if fully enraged. But still, there were too many. The trolls kept coming, wretched up by the tunnels that dotted the landscape. They piled on top of him, grunting and growling, their weight forcing Maul downward, forcing the trolls beneath him, their bones broken, their bodies slick with gore, forcing them to slip aside, to move out of the way, until Maul found himself trapped, found himself crushed, found himself pinned to the rocky surface of that world. To the surface of his world. He ground his teeth together and tried to push himself up, but to no avail. He clenched his eyes shut and he tried to throw the trolls off of him, but it was no use. He wrenched his neck, desperate for air, but the trolls would not budge. He opened his mouth to scream, insistent that he would not die silently. But as he did, another troll leapt upon the growing pile atop the one true king of men. The impact traveled down through the horde, and it forced Maul's head against the ground, rattling his jaws, clamping his teeth together, and caught in between was his tongue. He bit down on it, bit down hard on that bit of pink muscle, and the pain shot from his mouth to his shattered brain, then continued onward, sending shockwaves throughout his entire body. His muscles flexed, his very bones cried out for vengeance, and most importantly, his mouth filled with blood. The hot iron taste of rage filled his mouth and dribbled down his chin, and Maul once again communed with something older than the gods themselves, something more powerful than hate, something to be feared and worshipped in equal measure. The thing that had set his line apart from all others, that had won them their kingdom, and that had carried Maul this far. He communed with rage. It coursed through his body. He released his cudgel. He'd either pick it up later or he'd find himself relieved, freed from pain, floating in a place where he would not need it. Floating in the inky black void of nothingness. He let go of his club and placed his palms on the ground, clenching the broken rocks that filled the tundra. The rage urged him on. It fueled him as he clutched that heavy granite, squeezed it so hard that he felt it crack under his fingers as he pushed himself up. Some trolls fell, tumbling to the ground, but more were simply raised skyward, as shocked and horrified as their simple minds would allow. Meanwhile, Beneath them, beneath layer after layer of squirming trolls, Maul had carved out enough space to move, enough space to work with, enough space to tear his way out of that coffin made of bloated, green flesh. With enough room to move, with air coming in through the widening cracks between the trolls, Maul screamed. He howled, he roared, he screamed for his own life, for his throne, for his realm, and for what was rightfully his. But that wasn't all. Maul also screamed for something else, for his one true companion, for his one true friend, the one who had never forsaken him and never would, the one who had never betrayed him. He screamed for SKALD. He'd seen her enveloped in that flash of light, seen her devoured by that foul wizard's magic, the same as had been done to him. The same spell that took him had taken her as well, so it stood to reason that she too was here, in his home, that she too was stranded in this rocky, shattered hellscape, lost in what had become of this once great, once proud world, lost in the realm of men, lost in his realm. And if SKALD was there, if the massive feral cat beast was with him in that broken tundra, he would not let her fight and hunt alone. He would call out to her. He would find her. He would rescue her. He would bring her to his side, and she would join him as he marched across the earth, taking what was his, rebuilding his kingdom, and slaughtering all those who resisted. She would accompany him, as she had always done, until he sat secure on his throne, and SKALD lay curled up at his feet, purring contentedly. But for that to happen, and it had to happen, Maul would need to find her. He would need to fight out from these trolls, to break their bodies and cast them aside. He would need to fight. And so he did. Maul fought through the trolls that piled upon him. He shoved them aside. He punched, he elbowed, he bit. He ripped ears from skulls. He dug his fingers into eyes and he pulled. He fought with an unhinged fury that would have surely frightened any creature with sense in their head. But these were trolls. Violent, hateful, ignorant, and most of all, senseless. So as Maul shot an arm up through the top of the troll heap, as he forced his head into the open air, as he looked out through the blood that covered his roaring face, all he saw were more trolls. Body after body after body, they flung themselves at that writhing pile of flesh. They piled on top, and seeing Maul rise, seeing him ascend, seeing him dare to break free of their horde, they set upon him with a newfound determination, a reinvigorated ferocity. Maul screamed and he fought, but the trolls wouldn't be deterred. They forced him back down, though he fought them all the way. They grabbed at him with their fat, nubby fingers, tipped with thick, jagged nails that rent and tore. They forced him down as they ripped open his jerkin, eager to dig their fingers into his skin, to tear out his heart and be done with this interloper. They pushed him to the ground, to that hard, rocky earth, and they tore open the leather at his chest, revealing that long, twisting alabaster horn. Even in the darkness of that dying world, even under dozens of trolls, even coated in sweat and blood and worse, that long, twisting alabaster horn gleamed. It glowed. It illuminated the world around it. And as it did so, humming with light, Maul, for the first time since arriving in that world, he heard a voice that was not his own. It was a voice that he knew well, one he knew far too well, a voice that shook him to his core and made him hate and fear in equal measure. It was his voice, and it spoke out as he always did, with a command as heavy as a god and as sweet as honey. Smash it to the ground. Split the earth asunder. Maul shook his head, caught between certain death and him. Once again, caught between failure and the monster who had twice cursed him. Maul shook his head, heart pounding, eyes watering, as he saw the trolls, saw the long, twisting alabaster horn, and most importantly, he saw the inevitable. But he kept speaking. Embrace your heritage. Stop denying what you are, what you truly are. Embrace your destiny and tear this world apart. And Maul, with tears in his eyes, with blood in his mouth, and with hate in his heart, he obeyed. In one fluid motion, moving with the speed of a man with no other options, Maul grasped that long, twisting alabaster horn. He broke the strap that held it to his neck. He swung it outward and he brought it plummeting downward, crashing against the rocky earth at his side. And when it hit, when it collided, when that long, twisting alabaster horn made contact with the rocky earth, Maul's world exploded with light once again. But this was not the light of the wizard. No, while that light had been clear, cold, and white, this new flash, the one summoned forth by that long, twisting alabaster horn, was yellow, gentle, and warm. A light that hadn't been seen on that broken world in millennia, that hadn't been seen since the days when towers dotted the landscape, when the trolls were nowhere to be found, in the days before the sun had grown cold and dim. With that flash of light, Maul saw something, and he felt something. A transformation. The light washed over the trolls and it left them different, left them denatured, left them howling and crying, clawing at their own skin as it dried, hardened, and cracked. Maul wasn't a clever man, but he was smart enough to know that there was a time for questions and a time for action. And this, it was the latter. With the trolls above him distracted, petrified by the flash of light, he began to move. He swung his arms in wide arcs, still clutching that long, twisting alabaster horn in one hand as he snatched up his cudgel in the other. He kicked his legs, he thrashed from side to side, and he let out a victorious yell as the trolls fell to the side and scrambled away. They were afraid of the unknown, and they knew nothing. Maul's feet slipped on the slick, bloody rocks beneath him, but he quickly regained his balance and stood up, triumphant, in that barren wasteland. He swiveled his head, taking stock of the battlefield and how it had changed in the preceding moments. The trolls closest to him, the ones that had piled on top of him, now scrambled away, dragging their stiffening limbs along the ground, emitting the excruciating sound of stone upon stone. Their brethren, the ones who had not yet thrown themselves upon Maul, remained undeterred. Maul scanned the area. They came from all directions in impossible numbers, and they were steadily closing in on their prey. Was there no end to them? Did they spring forth from the rocks themselves? He began to look for a weak point, a break in their line, the spot at which he would charge and finally take the offensive. But as he did, he heard that voice again, heard it ooze forth from some unknown source, heard it slide through his mind, syrupy sweet, and felt it sit down in his soul, as heavy as iron. What are you waiting for? Maul stammered, trying and failing to keep his broken mind together. I don't want. No, please. When will you realize that what you want doesn't matter? That you don't have a choice? That you've never had a choice? Now do it! So once again, Maul obeyed. He let out a righteous, hateful cry as he slammed that long, twisting alabaster horn down upon the rocks. Harder this time, faster this time, as he had enough space to put his entire body into the strike, to send the long, twisting alabaster horn arcing through the air, to bring it crashing down, to smash it against the rocks that shivered, cried, and shattered under his relentless assault, the attack that caused the very earth beneath his feet to shudder and groan as Maul coaxed out that warm, yellow light. It worked. The horn, that long, twisting alabaster horn, did exactly as it was supposed to do, as it needed to do. It summoned forth a concentrated explosion of light, one so bright, so warm, so all-consuming that even the trolls outside of its radius took notice. Those nearest the blast suffered that familiar fate, the transformation that had taken their brethren, some of whom had failed to get away, and now found their skin even harder, even more rigid, even more cracked and broken than it was before. The trolls howled, and they cried, they moaned, and they wept, and the lucky ones struggled to get away upon legs that stiffened as they ran, with dead, heavy arms hanging by their sides, and those were the lucky ones, the ones to whom fate had not been so kind, laid upon the ground, motionless, their faces frozen in terror, eyes unable to close, as they watched the gore-covered, grinning savage approach them, watched him draw ever nearer with that burnt, blackened, notched, and bloody cudgel raised high above his brutish head. The trolls scrambled and fought against one another, desperate to run, to escape, to get away from the light and the man who had brought it. And as they did so, Maul stalked across the shattered landscape, bringing his cudgel down again and again, filling the air with the sounds of destruction, of wood on stone, of stone cracking and crumbling, of muted cries, of pitiful death rattles, and the victorious shouts of the one true king of men. He shattered limb after limb. He broke body after body. He crushed the fully stone trolls into rocks that bounced down into the darkened caves, into gravel that fell into cracks between boulders, into dust that rose up into the air around him. He killed, he crushed, and he destroyed. And throughout it all, he smiled because he was alive. He was home. When the trolls at his feet had been reduced to rocks, gravel, and dust, Maul stopped, and he took stock of that realm, of his kingdom. With his chest rising and falling quickly, no longer with exhaustion, but with excitement. He looked out across the tundra. The trolls who had been far enough away to avoid the flash of that long, twisting alabaster horn. They had learned. They had learned fear, and they ran, sprinting at full speed, desperate to put as much distance between Maul and themselves as possible. But the trolls who had been too close to the flash, the ones caught in the light, the ones who dragged their stiff limbs, the ones who staggered from the effects of hardening skin, they didn't move as quickly. So Maul slipped that long, twisting alabaster horn into an inner pocket, and he set out after them. Clutching his cudgel in his fist, he leaned forward and sprinted, leaned into what he was, what he thought himself to be, leaned into it and charged ahead. With a spiteful grin stretching across his face, he caught up to the trolls and swung on the first one to come into his reach. He swung again and again, holding the poor creature down with his left hand as he brought his gruesome club down again and again with his right. He smiled down at the dying troll as he beat the breath out of it, laughing each time his cudgel came down, and a shower of rock, of blood, and of gore came up. When the troll breathed its last, Maul leapt to his feet, invigorated by the chase, fueled by combat. He leapt to his feet and he dashed off toward the first troll that he saw. Again and again, he leapt up, he sprinted after them, he seized his quarry, and he beat them into a bloody mess of viscera and stone. And then he leapt up, and he began the cycle again. Maul didn't strategize. He didn't make a plan. He didn't even make an effort to target the trolls that were closest or slowest. It wasn't combat, and he was not a warrior. It was a massacre. And he was a butcher. But he was alive. He was home. And that was all that mattered. He was alive and he was home, so he didn't notice that the legs that propelled him forward, that the arm that swung his cudgel, that the face that shone through a thick sheen of blood, that they had all begun to turn to a pale shade of green. If you're digging SKALD, please help spread the word in real life and online, especially with those iTunes reviews. If you leave a good one, I'll even read it on the show. Z. Burley says, "This podcast is the best. The story is captivating and the narration is impeccable. Close your eyes, put on your headphones, and imagine sitting around a fire, the scent of roast venison wafting through the air, and hear the tale of Maul, the one true king of men. I'd give it 6 stars if I could." If you agree with Z. Burley, if you dig SKALD, if you appreciate not only the content, but the way in which this story is told, please hit up patreon.com/SKALD. Producing the show is a joy, but it takes a ton of time each and every week. And outside of ebook sales, Patreon is the only way that I monetize it. Help me continue to produce a new episode of SKALD each and every week. Go to patreon.com/SKALD. I would love to hear from you on social media. Find me on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. Username Aubrey Sitterson. Or hit up AubreySitterson.com for links to everything, including SKALD, the SKALD ebooks, my comics writing, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, bio, contact information, and more. My recommendation to you this week? It's something a little different. I'm guessing that if you're listening to SKALD, there's a good chance that you might be into some tabletop role-playing games, especially Dungeons & Dragons. If so, there's an awesome resource that you should totally avail yourself of: the Monster a Day subreddit. User Stone Strix uploads a new monster every day, which is an amazing way to keep your games fresh and interesting, especially if you've got people in your group who've read through the monster manual. Check it out at reddit.com/r/monsteraday. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.